What's up everybody, welcome back. So we're going to continue working on the weapon wheel today, and we're going to make it so that if we right click we get this selection menu with our current weapons in our inventory, and we can select the weapon that we want to equip in this slot. So that's what we're going to do today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to get your hands on the project file, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon, and then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord and also a download for this project file. So let's dive into today's video. So we're going to start doing some work in the widget. So let's go to the widget blueprint weapon wheel, and in here we want to add the new menu. So first of all, I'm gonna grab myself a size box and drop that on top of the canvas panel, and I'm gonna rename the size box. So this is going to be the selection box, and make sure that this is a variable. Now we want to make sure the alignment is top left. So this is important for later if we start moving this widget around if we create it. So keep the alignment at top left. And then I'm going to put the position at 1140 and then 420. The size is going to be 300 by, well, let's say 400. That doesn't really matter. Then I'm going to enable the width override in here and set that to 300. So this will be the start. That's our size box. And in there, I'm going to drop a border. So I'm just gonna make the border black. So let's go to the brush and then change the color. Let's do the brush color over here. And just turn it down a bunch. Well, not completely black, but gray. So that's the border for the background. Then on top of that, we want to grab a scroll box. So let's go to the panel section and look for a scroll box, drop it on top of the border, and I'm going to rename it. So this is the scroll box for the weapon buttons. So let's get rid of the space here and then weapon buttons. So this needs to be a variable again, so make sure you enable it at the top right. Then I'm going to grab myself some text and drop that inside of the scroll box. So this is simply going to be a sort of a header. So this is going to say select primary or select secondary or whatever. So I'm going to make the text a little bit smaller and select a different font. So I think something about 18. Yeah, that should be fine. And then this is going to say something like select and then something else. So we want to make this text a variable again. So I'm going to call it the text for the selection header. And enable is variable at the top right over here. Then the last thing we want to do is grab a horizontal box and drop it inside of the scroll box again. And inside of the horizontal box, we're going to grab a button. And on top of the button, we're going to drop some text again. So first of all, let's make sure the font matches. So we can just copy it from the other text item here and paste it. And then we want to rename the button. So the first one is simply going to be button 01. So this button has different uses depending on what menu it is. So I'm not going to give it a name, I'm just going to give it a number. Then the text is going to be the text for button 1. And the text needs to be a variable. So for now we can set the text to something like a clear. So that will clear the current slot. If we select the button, we want to make sure that we have fill enabled, I think. Yeah, so let's enable fill over here. And we can change the tint for the button a little bit if we hover it, for example. So I'm going to make it a little bit greenish. And if we click it, I'm going to make it a little bit brighter green. There we go, that should be fine. So now we can duplicate this button. So we have two buttons next to each other. And the second button is going to be the button to cancel. So button cancel. Oh, really? And the text does not need to be a variable in this case, so we can disable that. And we can just set the text over here to cancel, and that's not going to change. So this is going to be the start of the selection box. Now we want to go back to the actual selection box, and I'm going to enable size to content, so it will shrink down. And we could grab these buttons and give them a little bit of padding, so it looks a little bit better. So I'm going to select both of them and set the padding to 2. And now there's a little bit of spacing between them, so that looks a little bit better. So this will be the start of our selection menu. So let's compile and save this. And now we need to create a widget for the buttons that we're gonna place in here. So before I'm gonna close this widget, I'm gonna copy this font. And then let's move this to the side, and we're gonna create a new widget. So user interface, widget blueprint, and select the user widget. So let's call this something like widget blueprint, weapon wheel selection button. And open it up. So this is going to be really simple. First of all, we're going to grab a button and simply drop it on top of here. And then we're going to grab some text and drop that on top of the button. So make sure that we paste in the font over here so that matches. And then let me check my example quickly. Oh, I switched pages over here. So the text needs to be a variable. So let's rename the text first, and that's going to be the weapon name. And make sure we enable is variable. And then let's rename the button. So this is simply going to be a button. And that needs to be a variable as well. Now we could grab the style from the other buttons so they actually match. So if we go back to the weapon wheel, select the button and then copy the style. Go back to the selection button and paste it over here. So now the colors match as well. And then we need to go to the graph and set up a small event construct. So first of all, let's add 2 variables. The first one is going to be the weapon row name. So that's our name variable. And we want to make it instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then we're also going to add the weapon display name. And this is a text variable. And again, we want to make it instance editable and then exposed on spawn. So let's get rid of pre-construct and tick over here. And then we're going to grab the text weapon name and simply set the text. Plug it in and plug in the weapon display name variable. So that's good to go. That's all we need to do in here. So compile and save it. And we can get rid of this one and go back to the weapon wheel. And we're going to set up the graph to make everything work. So let's open up our graph. The first thing I want to do is add 2 new variables. So let's click the little plus sign. And the first one is going to be the selection for slot. And this is going to be an integer. And then we also want an array of our weapon wheel selection buttons. So we're going to call this all selection buttons. And then turn it into our widget blueprint weapon wheel selection button. And turn it into an array as well. So with those in place, let's start making the functions that we need. And the first one I'm going to create is called set button styles. Over here. So let me quickly explain what this one does. So if we have the weapon wheel over here and we right click, the menu pops up. But if we hover over any of the other buttons, they will still become active and this one will become deactivated. So that's not what I want. When I right click, I want the button that I right clicked to stay highlighted and don't change if I hover over anything else. And we're going to do that by simply changing the style of the button for the hovered and the active and the normal states. So if we go to the set button style function, first of all, we're going to give it two inputs. So select the function over here, give it an input, and the first one is our active button index. So this is an integer, and then we need a second one, and this is going to be reset buttons, and that's a boolean. So first of all, let's grab a branch in here, and we're going to check if we want to reset the buttons or set them to the active state. So if we want to reset them, we're going to grab all of our buttons from the variables. So not all selection buttons, but all buttons that we created in the previous episode. So those are the 4 buttons for the selection wheel. We're going to grab a for each loop, plug it into the true pin over here. And then we simply want to set the style of each button. So drag off the array element and type set style. And choose the one under appearance for the button. Hook it up to the loop body. And now what we want to do is drag off the style. And we want to make a button style. And then we're going to drag off normal. And we want to make a slate brush. So we can expand this. And then from the slate brush, we want to expand the tint. And again, make a slate color. And then I'm going to make this a little bit different. So I'm going to drag off the color again and make a linear color. So I can just enter the numbers over here. You can also just select it over here in the selection box, whatever you prefer. Now for this make slate brush, we want to make sure that we set the image size to 512 by 512. And then for the button, we need to select our actual weapon wheel button. So this image over here. So button a quarter, so 1_4. So let's look for the texture over here. Button quarter, and not the active one, but the normal one. And then for the buttons that have a normal state, so that are not pressed, I'm gonna go to the designer and then grab the normal style over here. So for me, the red, green, blue have the same number, and then I have alpha 0.7. So I can just paste in those numbers over here. So I pressed the wrong button, so copy it over here. Paste it in here, and then my alpha is 0.7. There we go. So this is for a normal button. Oh, well, you know what that means, normal button. And then for the button style over here, if we are resetting the buttons, we only want to plug the normal in there. And then we're going to create a second one for the active buttons. So let's move this up a little bit, and then we can simply copy and paste it down here. So this is going to be the active button. And in this case, we want to grab the quarter image but active. So let's select the image over here, look for button quarter, and then select the active one. Make sure the image size is 512 again, and I'm gonna grab the color from the designer. So over here I have the color a little bit lighter if I hover or press the button. So you kind of want to make sure the hovered and the pressed events are the same, because you can't actually click the button to make something happen. So if you set them up to be the same, you won't see the difference if you click the button. So I'm gonna copy this number, and my alpha is 1. Then simply paste it in here for the active button and set my alpha to 1. So this one, we want to plug it into the hovered and to the pressed one for the button style. And then we are good to go over here. And then we want to do the other branch, so the false branch. And in this case, we want to set one button to active and set the other ones to be not active. So again, we're going to grab a for each loop for all of the buttons, plug it in here. And first we're going to check with a branch if the current array element is our active button index. So let's grab the button index and compare it. So that's our condition. If this is true, we want to set the button style again. So set style, plug it into the true pin, and we're going to make a button style over here. And then in this case, we simply want to plug all three of them into the active button. So let's go to the button active over here. And then we're going to plug in normal, hovered, and pressed, like so. And then if this is false, we also want to set the button style. So let's copy and paste it. But in this case, we want to hook all three of them up to the normal one. So grab normal and plug it into the normal button over here. And do the same thing for hovered and pressed. There we go. So let me double check. Yeah, that should be the entire function. So we can use this to set up our button styles. I forgot to hook up the button as a target over here. So make sure you plug in the array element. And the error is gone. So that's the first function. And now we're going to create the function that will actually create the selection menu. So let's create a new function and call this one create selection menu. There we go. So we're not going to give it any inputs or anything like that, but we are going to create a new normal variable, and that's going to be isSelectingWeapon. And I'm going to turn it into a single variable and then a boolean. So in here, the first thing we're going to do is grab this boolean and set it to true. Then we want to grab all of our selection buttons. And we're going to grab a for each loop so we can remove them from the parent. So this is just to make sure that our old selection buttons are gone and we start with an empty menu. So remove from parent and plug it into the loop body. Then we're going to grab the all selection button array again and we're going to clear it. Plug it into the completed pin. So the array is empty and all of the buttons are gone. Then we're going to grab a for each loop. And for the for each loop, we're going to plug in our weapon inventory. So not the weapon loadout, but the weapon inventory. All the weapons that the player is carrying. And the first thing we're going to do is grab a branch over here and make sure that the slot is not empty. So drag off the array element and do is not equal to. And then in here, we're going to type empty. And that's our condition. So if the slot is not empty, we're going to get a table row. So get a table row. And we want to get it from our weapon info table. And for the row name, we can plug in our array element from the for each loop. There we go. So let's grab the out row over here and we're going to break it. And we actually want the display name and the weapon type. But first of all, let's set up a switch over here. So we want to grab our selection for slot, a variable, drag off here and look for switch on integer. Plug that one into the row found pin. And then we're going to enter 0, 1, 2, and 3 in here. So we don't really need a default pin and we can add 3 entries. Excuse me. And then from here we can make sure that we can only select the proper weapon for each slot. So slot 0 is going to be for secondary weapons and slot 1 and 2 is going to be for primary weapons. So we can drag off the weapon type from the data table, drag it off here and switch on the weapon type again. So plug this into the 0 pin. And in this case, we only want to continue if this is a secondary weapon. So we're going to drag off the secondary pin and then create a widget. So let's leave this here for now. First of all, we're gonna drag off the weapon type again and switch on the weapon type again. This time we're gonna plug in slot 1 and 2. And we're only gonna continue if this is a primary weapon. So hook them up like this and leave the other pins empty. And that should be good to go. Now for the widget, we're gonna construct our weapon wheel selection button. And in here we can plug in the weapon row name, the display name, and we need to get our owning player. So for the owning player, we can simply type get owning player, plug it in here. And then let's go to our data table and grab the display name. So we can plug that in over here. And over here we can get the weapon row name from the for each loop and plug it in as well. There we go. Now I noticed there is one thing I forgot to add to the selection button widget, and that's a variable for the weapon wheel widget. So we want to make sure that we add that as well. So let's compile and save this for now. Close it and go back to the selection button widget. Go to the graph. Add a new variable, and that's our widget blueprint weapon wheel. Turn it into a weapon wheel reference. And make sure we give it the instance editable and exposed on spawn flags. So compile and save it. Then we can go back to the weapon wheel and refresh this node. And for the weapon wheel, we want to drag off and enter a reference to ourselves. So that should be good to go. So we created a button for a weapon, and then we're going to add it to our array. So we're going to grab all of the selection buttons and add an entry, plug it in here, plug in the return value. After we added it to the array, we're also going to add it to our scroll box. So let's go for the scroll box weapon buttons, drag it in here, and we want to add a child. So hook it up and make sure that you hook up the return value again as the content for the scroll box, like so. And then the last thing we are going to do in here is grab a branch, and we want to make sure that we disable any buttons for weapons that we already have equipped. So what we can do in this case is grab the weapon loadout array, because those are the weapons that we have equipped. We're going to drag off here and we're going to find an item. So we can simply look for the weapon row name that comes from the for each loop. So plug that in over here. And then if this returns greater than or equal to 0, that means we already have this weapon equipped. So we're going to plug this into the condition, and then we're going to set the button to be disabled. So drag off the return value again and then set enabled. So if the condition is true, then the button is going to be disabled. So that should be good to go. And so let me double check. So this should be the creation for our menu for now. So we're gonna expand this a little bit later, but for now this should work. So with this function in place, we also want to make a function to close the selection menu. So let's go to functions again, and we're going to create close selection menu. And let me grab my notes in here quickly. So the first thing we are going to do in here is set our isSelecting weapon boolean back to false. Then we want to grab our selection box. Yes, selection box. So that's over here, not the scroll box, but the actual entire selection box with the border and everything in it. And we're going to set the visibility. And in this case, we want to hide it. So let's set it to hidden. And then we're going to grab a for each loop again, plug it in here. We're going to loop through all of our selection buttons. No. And let's remove them from parent. So that goes into the loop body. And we need to clear the array. So let's copy and paste it over here. Clear array. hook it up to the completed pin. And after we cleaned up all of the buttons, we want to grab our set button styles function. And we're going to plug it in over here. And this time we want to reset the buttons. So enable the reset boolean, and that should be good to go. Let's compile and save. So we have a function to create and to close the menu. So now we want to make sure that the menu is created if we right click the mouse. So we're going to make that happen by overriding an input event. So let's go to functions and then override, and we want to grab our mouse button down event. So on mouse button down. And we're going to set it up over here. So we need a bunch of room. The first thing we want to do is grab a branch in here, and we want to check if we are selecting weapons already. So let's grab the is selecting weapon boolean and plug it into a branch. So we are pretty much only going to continue if this is false. So if this is true, we can grab a return node, and we want to set the return value to unhandled. And that's already done. Now, if this is false, we're going to drag off the mouse event, and we want to get the key. No, that's not true. We want to get our is mouse button down, sorry. So look for is mouse button down, and then in here you can select the right mouse button. So we need to plug this into a branch to determine if we pressed the left or the right mouse button. So in this case, we need the right one. So if this is false, we can return as well. If this is true, we're going to grab our hovered slot index, drag it in here, and we're going to switch on integer, plug it into the true pin. So let's add one for all of the slots that we have, so 0, 1, 2, and 3. And let's also keep the default pin, because the hovered slot index can also be -1 if we are not hovering any slot. So in this case, let's grab the close selection menu function, drag it in here, and we're going to hook it up to the 3 pin and to the default pin. So currently we don't have any equipment that we can select. We're going to make this later. And if we are not hovering any valid slots, we also don't want the menu, so we're going to close it. Then for the other ones, we need a local variable. So I'm going to create a local text variable and call that my local header text. Local header text. And turn it into a text variable. I'm going to drag in a setter over here. And if we are right clicking slot 0, then I'm going to say select secondary. And then we can copy and paste it over here, plug it into the 1 and the 2 slots, and then I'm going to say select primary. Then we're going to grab our hovered slot index as a getter, and we're going to set our selection for slot variable over here. So we can still move the mouse around, so the hovered slot index will change. And we want to make sure that we have the slot stored where we actually press the button. So that's what we're doing over here. Then we can grab our set button styles function, drag it in here, and we can hook up the hovered slot index or the selection for slot, that's even better, to the active button over here. So this will make the button styles work. And then we're going to grab the text for the selection header, drag it in here as well, and set the text. And then we can plug in the local variable that we just created. So the local header text, and that goes in here. The next thing I want to do is get the mouse position on viewport. So this one. Nope. And from that, we're going to grab our selection box from the variables over here. And we want to get this slot as a canvas slot. So look for slot as canvas slot. And if we have that, we can drag off the slot and actually set the position. Plug it in here. And then we're going to set the position to the mouse position. So we're going to create the widget where the mouse currently is. Then drag off the selection box again, and we're going to set the visibility. Make sure we set it to visible. And the last thing we want to do is call our create selection menu over here and plug it in. So that will create the actual buttons in the menu. So that's the function that we need over here. So we can grab a return node, plug it in, and then over here look for handled. And then hook it up all the way over here to the close selection menu as well. So that's the function that we need for the mouse button down. So compile and save, and that's good to go. One small thing we want to do in the event graph. So let's go there. In here, we're going to add an event destruct. So right click, look for destruct, and that's event destruct over here. So this will fire if the widget gets removed from the parent, for example. And in here, we simply want to call our close selection menu. And then we also want to go to the cancel button. So button cancel over here. And we're going to grab the OnClicked event. And for that one, we also want to call our close selection menu. So simply plug it in as well. Those should be good to go. So we can compile and save this widget. And we want to make a small change in the shooter player controller. So let's go there. Framework and open our shooter player controller. Go to the UI close weapon wheel function. And right now we are selecting a weapon that we are hovering. And we want to make sure that if we have the selection menu open and then close the weapon wheel, that we don't actually switch weapons. So this will just feel a little bit better. It's just weird if you have the menu open and you are hovering a button in the background that you select a weapon. So that's what we're doing over here. So let me grab my notes quickly because something messed up. I think these are actually from my notes, maybe. I'm not sure what's happening. Give me a second. Okay, I'm back. That was weird. So for the close weapon wheel, we want to go behind this branch right before the switch on integer. We're going to make a little bit of room. And then we can drag off the weapon wheel over here. And we want to get our isSelecting weapon boolean. So let's plug in a branch in between here. And then plug in the condition. So if we are not selecting a weapon, if this is false, we're going to continue to the switch on integer. And if this is true, then we simply want to plug it into the remove from parent over here. So then we're not going to actually switch weapons. We're going to skip that part and just remove the weapon wheel widget. So plug it into the remove from parent node from the true pin. There we go, like so. Okay, so that's the change that we need in here. And now the actual menu should show up and the weapons in there should be the correct ones. The only downside is if we press a button in there, nothing will actually happen. And we forgot to set it hidden by default, so we need to make sure we do that. And I didn't add any padding to these buttons, so I want to make sure we do that as well. But other than that, if you click cancel, it should close the button. And if you close the menu with the button open, it should be closed as well if you reopen it. And if you right click, the hovered slot should stay active and the other ones shouldn't change if you hover over them. So make sure those things work. And then we can make the small adjustments that I mentioned. So let's go back to the weapon wheel widget. This is nothing to worry about. Close it down, widgets, and then open the weapon wheel. So we want to go to the selection box, and by default we're going to set the visibility to hidden. Compile and save. And I want to go to the selection button over here, select the button, and I'm going to make sure that we have some padding in here. So we can probably set it over here on the actual widget. Yeah, so select the selection button widget all the way at the top, and then I'm going to set the padding over here to 2. So it matches the buttons above there. Okay, so that's good to go. Now we can make sure that the buttons will actually do something if we click them. So to make all of this work, first of all, we need an event inside of the hero base character so that the owning client can tell the server to update the loadout array. So let's go to the hero base character and look for an empty spot on the event graph. I'm going to create a new custom event, and that is going to be server assign weapon to loadout. So first of all, let's make sure this replicates to run on server. And then we simply want to grab the weapon loadout from the variables, and we want to set an array element. So this is pretty simple for now. We're going to expand this a little bit later, but for now all we need is the set array element and make sure we pass on the index and item to the event. And we shouldn't need size to fit, so we can leave that blank. The index is going to be the loadout index. And then the item is going to be the weapon row name. And that's all we need inside of the hero base character. So let's compile and save that one, close it down, and we can go back to our widget. And let's start in the weapon wheel widget. Go to the event graph again. And in here, first of all, let's create an OnClicked event for our button 01. So that's the clear button over here. But it's going to have another purpose if we replace weapons later. So that's why I didn't name it button clear. But we're going to go back to the graph and grab the button 1. Add an OnClicked event. So this is to make the slot cleared, to empty the slot. So what we want to do is grab our create weapon wheel function, drag it in here, and we want to set it to our selection for slot variable. So we can simply grab that from the variables and plug it into the button index. And for the name, we can drag off and make a literal name. And we simply want to type empty in here. So we're going to make the slot empty. And then we want to grab our player character from the variables, and we want to call our server assign weapon to loadout. And again, we can simply plug in the variables that we just grabbed over here. So selection for slot and the literal name. And after we assigned the slot to be empty, we're going to call our close selection menu. So plug that in over here. So that's for the clear button, and now we need an event we can call to actually assign weapons to the slot. So let's right click, create a custom event, and I'm going to call this select weapon for slot. So we want to put a weapon row name in here as an input. So let's create an input, weapon row name, and that's a name variable. Then, first of all, we want to call our create weapon wheel button again, plug it in over here, pass on the weapon row name, and simply grab the selection for slot as the index. Again, we want to call the player character to assign the weapon to the loadout, so copy and paste that over here, and this time plug in the variables as well, like so. And then we're going to close the selection menu, so plug that in over here. So with this function in place, or event, we can compile and save it. Go back to the widgets folder and open the selection button. Go to the graph over here. And for this, we're going to create a clicked event for the button, so OnClicked. And then we're simply going to grab our weapon wheel widget and call our select weapon for slot. Plug that in over here, and then plug in the weapon row name. So that should make everything work. So right now we can compile and save, and we should be pretty much good to go. So let's just run a little test in here to see if everything is working. So we can pretty much do this solo because all of the widget stuff isn't replicated anyway. So let's go to free for all and start a game. So right now we should be able to actually assign a different weapon to a slot. So if I right click, for example, I can click clear over here. The weapon will disappear. And now it's available to assign in another slot. So I can assign it over here, for example, or go back to the other slot and assign it over here. So these are primary weapons and they go in slot 1 and 2. And the other one is the secondary weapon. So you can see over here, I can only select the pistol. So that part is working as well. And then, for example, if I press the AA20 over here, then it will put the shotgun in that slot and it will be selectable as well. So we have that part working. Now, for now, the holstered weapons don't update. And if you select your current weapon in here, it doesn't actually switch weapons on the character. So those are all things that we're going to take care of later. But we have the actual basics for the buttons set up and good to go. And you should also see that if you pick up more weapons right now, so I got 3 weapons, and if I go and pick up something else from the ground, so for example, these ones, then I should be able to select them over here as well. So now I have 2 versions of the pistol, the auto and the normal one, and I can select it. And over here, the Maverick is also in the inventory. So I can carry more weapons than I can assign, and that part is working as well. Okay, so I think we made some pretty decent progress, and we're gonna stop right here. In the next video, we're gonna continue working on the actual widget to make the information card show up that show the difference between the statistics for the weapons. So thanks for watching everybody, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later guys, bye bye.